General Maths students, in this video we're going to discuss correlation. So a correlation coefficient, we obtain that whenever we do a linear regression. Now we're not going to go through that process in this video, we're just going to interpret the meaning of the correlation coefficient, which is the R value. Righto, so we've got some questions here, which we have R value or correlation coefficient for, and we're going to interpret those. Now I just want to show you these graphics here. Now this one in particular is the one we get on the information sheet at the time of recording this video. That's what the correlation coefficient, that's the information we have on the information sheet that we have for tests and exams. So that's what you get as a help in assisting you to interpret the correlation coefficient when you're doing a test. In the textbook currently, we have a bit more information. We have the same continuum, so going from -1 through to +1, but going in a different direction. But we have some sentences here which we can follow in terms of interpreting or writing a sentence to interpret the correlation coefficient. Okay, now the continuum goes from -1 down at this end up to +1 at the other end, and -1 or +1 or close to those values. All right, now these are the correlation coefficient will not be lower than -1 or higher than +1. It's between -1 and 1. And at those two ends, down towards -1 and up towards +1, we're talking about strong correlation. So a high level of correlation, which is good. That shows that the data points follow the trend line closely, which is a good thing for a linear relationship. This negative correlation indicates that as x increases, the y value is decreasing, and vice versa. As x increases in the positive, for a positive correlation coefficient, y is decreasing. Beg your pardon, y is increasing as well. So as x increases, y increases. Now, at the other end of the scale is zero correlation, or between -0.25 and 0.25. In here, we don't have, or we term that as no correlation. There is not a relationship between the variables, which means the linear model is not all that good in that case. As you can see along the continuum in both directions, negative and positive, we start to move into weak correlation, which is still not all that good, not pointing towards a good model, into moderate, which is a bit better but not ideal. We really want strong correlation. Okay, so let's place the correlation for these situations here. I'm going to do the first one, then I want you to try by pausing the video and try and write some sentences for part B and part C. Okay, so here we have a researcher investigating the proposition that tall boys have tall mothers. The heights of 12 boys and their mothers are measured. Okay, so our variables here are the height of the mother and the height of the boy. Now the height of the mother is the independent variable because the heights of the boys may depend on the height of the mother. That's what we're looking at here. So if the height of the boy is the dependent variable, so boy's height is the dependent. Now that is the y variable, of course. So that's going to be our y variable. And so the height of the mother will be the x variable, the independent variable. Will be the x variable. So it's important to identify which variable is which. We need to know which is the dependent, the y variable, and which is the independent, the x variable. Now our correlation coefficient, our R value is 0.7. So let's go and place that on the continuum. 0.7 is it's about here roughly, so it's in the moderate positive region. So in an assessment situation like a test, you'd have that. You know that you had moderate positive correlation. Now you're going to need to remember how to interpret it off by heart. Okay, so you're going to need to learn these to some extent, these sentences. Don't have to be perfect, but just the general way these sentences are structured. If you can get something close to this, that's fine. But I'm going to try and do it verbatim, which means exactly the same. But of course, I'm going to use this sentence here because we're talking about moderate positive correlation. That's what I'm going to write. But I can't just say X and Y. I need to use the variables in this context. Okay, so there is moderate correlation between the variables, moderate positive correlation. Okay, so there is a moderate positive correlation let's see if I can remember it. Doesn't have to be perfect. Between the variables. Now there is some evidence to show that the greater now I'm going to say the X variable, I'm not going to say the X variable, I'm going to state the X variable for this situation, which is the height of the mothers. The greater the height of the mother, I'm putting the X variable first, and now the Y variable, the greater the height of the son. Oh, getting a bit long here, but I'll squeeze it in. The greater the height of the sun. Okay, so it might not be exactly the same as that one over there, but that is fine to write something like that. Okay, now I encourage you to pause the video, look at part B and part C. So remember, you need to identify the independent and the dependent variables, and then determine the level of correlation and choose the appropriate sentence, inserting the variables appropriately. Pause the video and try that, and then I will reveal a couple of sentences that I wrote down for those. Okay, so I'm going to reveal the sentences that I wrote. All right, so there's the first one again, show that there. Okay, now this second one, part B, we've got a moderate negative correlation between the variables. There is some evidence to show that the greater the amount of physical exercise, so the amount of physical exercise was the independent variable, the lower the weight. The weight was the dependent variable. Okay, and then part C with this market economist. Okay, we've got a correlation coefficient of negative 0.85, which is strong negative. Now I can be more definitive here. So our X variable, our independent variable, was the price, and the Y variable was the level of sales, or the number of sales. And so I can just flat out say that there's a strong negative correlation between the variables. The greater the price, the lower the sales. As you can see by the sentences over here, how that, using this sentence here. Okay, so that's what you need to do. It's definitely worth practicing several of these because there's a very high chance of being asked to interpret the correlation coefficient during assessment in general maths. So please go ahead and try some more of these questions.